Hello and welcome to another video trying to get you the very top grades. This is in the top 10 series and today we're looking at literary allusions, and allusions means a reference to, and if you can spot the references that writers make to other writers, then you are automatically in the top band for that part of your essay. So we're looking at references that are literary, in other words, about other pieces of writing, other texts. Number one is Murder on the Orient Express, a detective story by Agatha Christie, released in 1934, probably one of her most famous novels, and one that Priestley would expect most people in his audience to either know about or to have read. Now there's a spoiler alert here. I do recommend you go and read the novel just for fun, but if so, you're in trouble with this bit, because the spoiler alert is that the person killed in the Orient Express is actually killed by all the suspects. They all contributed to the murder. And that is the plot device that Priestley deliberately uses in his play, but with a twist. He's trying to show the audience and the characters on stage that they are all responsible for that murder. And that's his way of spreading the message that we are all of one body and all responsible for each other. And by the way, in making this video, I'm trying to make it shorter, so I will just talk about what's in bold. But if you want to freeze the screen later for your revision and read the other text, you'll get much more information. Do put your comments below and let me know whether this is a useful way for you to revise, or whether actually you just like the white space and just the bold stuff on the screen. So here is our second literary allusion. It's to the Bible, not the Old Testament, but the New Testament. And it asks this question of the audience: is God a killer? In other words, is it ever right to create a greater good by killing somebody? And this idea comes from God deciding to come down on earth in human form, in the form of Jesus, but then sacrificing himself and Jesus, in other words, killing Jesus off, in order for the greater good of saving mankind from our sin. So the idea is he sacrifices Jesus in order to teach everybody the lesson that we can all lead a better life according to Jesus's teachings, and if we do, we will become better people and go to heaven. And this is the same message that Priestley offers us in a way. If the Burlings learn the lesson of Eva's death, then they will change and will create a kind of social heaven on earth where we all are responsible for each other and look after each other. But the only way to do that is to sacrifice Eva and have her commit suicide and die. So this argument will help many students who I've taught over the years who say, does that mean when the inspector goes off stage, he goes off and kills Eva in order to teach the Burlings a lesson? Now that seems a horrendous idea which doesn't fit with Inspector Gould's teaching about us all being responsible for each other. But if we think about the literary allusion to the New Testament, then that actually is exactly how God operates. He kills people in order to teach a moral lesson. That's what he's done with Jesus. So you could have that interpretation where the inspector kills Eva Smith off in order to have that second phone call. But you can only give that interpretation if you allude to the New Testament and make this direct link with Jesus, and then say that the inspector therefore is a proxy for, is a proxy for God. Right, hopefully your teacher has explained something to you about the morality play. So the morality play was big business in the 15th and 16th centuries because this was a way of bringing the Bible to the masses who, of course, couldn't read, and even if they could, the Bible was written in Latin. So unless you were highly educated, you had no chance of reading it for yourself. So instead, the Christian teachings of the Bible were dramatized on stage, and typically you had characters on stage who would illustrate the 7 deadly sins. Here they are. So envy, the desire to have an item or experience what someone else possesses, and that of course is Sheila. gets Eva Smith sacked because she is envious of Eva being more attractive than she is. Gluttony, excessive ongoing consumption of food and drink. And as we can see, Eric personifies that through his alcohol abuse. Greed or avarice, an excessive pursuit of material possessions. So we can definitely see that with Arthur Burling. He's greedy for more business, and we can also actually say that Gerald is the same, and that's one of the big attractions of the marriage from Burling's point of view, Mrs. Burling's point of view, and Gerald's point of view. Then we have lust. Well, you can easily see how Eric is connected with lust. He in fact probably rapes Eva. He certainly forces himself on her for sex, and obviously Gerald himself is lustful and uses Eva for his own sexual pleasures and then gets rid of her as soon as he's had enough. Then we have pride, the excessive view of oneself without regard to others. Well, we can certainly see that Gerald is like that, but the most obvious one is Sybil Burling, who keeps talking about girls of that class, meaning that she is far too proud to lower herself, to consider that anyone from a lower social class could be good enough for her. And in fact, you can see that in her language towards her husband, who comes from a lower social class. Then we have sloth, excessive laziness, or the failure to act and utilise one's talents. Well, we could certainly look at Eric that way, even though I haven't written it here. He is a man with a Oxford or Cambridge University education, and he's wasting his time in his father's business in a junior position, and even stealing from his father rather than going out and making his own way. And then wrath, uncontrollable feelings of anger and hate towards another person. I debated this one. You could argue that the inspector represents this anger, although he remains calm all the way through the play. And so possibly a better interpretation is that wrath is actually represented by Priestley. It's his anger that creates the whole play. It's his anger towards the ruling classes for the way that they treat the working classes. And when you're writing about the morality play, you obviously want to link this to Priestley's moral purpose and his moral teaching, that didactic sense that he wants to teach everybody a lesson. Now we have some more biblical allusions to different books of the Bible. So we have Romans and Corinthians, and it's this reference that the inspector makes saying we are all members of one body. Now this language is deliberately Christian. Why? Because 80% of the audience in 1945 were regular attenders at church. So the vast majority of his audience considered themselves practicing Christian, and therefore their whole education in church is based around this common language, which Priestley uses because he's trying to make this point. If you are a truly Christian human being, the only way you can possibly vote in an election is socialist, because the socialist message, we are all members of one body, is exactly the same as the Christian message. Therefore, the socialists aren't cranks, they're actually people like you with good Christian values, and you should consider your Christian duty to get rid of a conservative government and vote for a socialist one. So here it is in Romans. So we being many are one body in Christ, and everyone members one of another. And in Corinthians, for we being many are one bread and one body, for we are all partakers of that one bread. And if that isn't enough, we also have the Anglican Communion Service, which is organised like this. So the priest reads out prepared words as a prayer, if you like, and then the audience, the congregation, have particular words that they chant back. And so the priest says, breaking of the bread. This is what they do. The priest says, we break this bread to share in the body of Christ. And then everybody in the congregation says, though we are many, we are one body, because we all share in one bread. So this language is deeply ingrained, it's memorized, it's habit, it's ritual, it's at the tip of everyone's tongue, and when they hear that from the inspector, they know exactly that his message is a Christian one. At number 7, we have Aristotle's Poetics, the idea of the 3 unities. So Aristotle invented the rules of tragedy in theatre. The Greeks invented theatre. So Priestley is going back to the very roots of theatre, and he says, right, there has to be the unity of action. So just one plot, not different subplots with things going on with different characters at different times. You have to have a unity of time, so all the action has to take place over one day or 24 hours. And then finally, unity of place. You can't dart about from one spot to another. It all happens to happen in the same place. In this case, the Burling's drawing room. So partly Priestley does this to show his skill as a dramatist, because it's difficult to follow these rules, but he's also doing it for a much more important reason, which is to tell the audience that this is a tragedy. And it's a tragedy in the classical traditions of tragedy, where the flaws of the hero is exposed. But in this case, all the upper classes are the heroes, ironically, whose flaws are all being exposed. And he does this, of course, in order to try and change the view of the upper classes, but also change the view of everyone else towards the upper classes and say, look, they all have these fatal flaws. They are all these tragic figures, and we need to reject them. And next, I hope you've picked up from my earlier videos the references to Dickens' A Christmas Carol. So the idea here is that the audience already know this incredibly famous story about 3 ghosts, the ghosts of past, present and future, who come to teach Scrooge a lesson that will transform his behaviour. He, of course, is a rich man who just exists in order to pursue wealth, and that's a direct parallel with Gerald, the Crofts and the Burlings, and he has exactly the same message as Priestley does, which is that the rich need to learn their lessons, to look after everybody else, to be members of one body. And that's what Scrooge does. He learns through the one particular character, Tiny Tim, the son of Bob Cratchit. He realises he has to save that young man's life. And when he does save Tiny Tim's life, he does it just by changing his ways, because what he does is change the future. And that's due to the ghost of Christmas yet to come. And it's exactly this kind of playing with the future that Priestley does at the end of the play, when Gerald finds out that Eva has not yet died and the future is still in balance. There's still the possibility that if they learn their lesson, then Eva will be saved, there will be no suicide. But they don't learn their lesson, and what's the result? The second phone call. The future has come to pass, it's no longer suspended, and Eva dies. So we can see how he prepares his audience for this ending, because they will intimately know the ending of A Christmas Carol and make the connection between the two. And that's the job of a literary allusion. It's no good having a reference that the audience don't get. They have to get it, and that has to lead to a deeper understanding. Right, we end with number 9 because I couldn't in fact find 10 literary allusions. So the final one is from the Labour Party Manifesto of 1945, and it was called Let Us Face the Future. And if you just look at that, what a title that could be. Let Us Face the Future would exactly fit the events of the play. So the words that we're looking at here is Burling's description of himself as a hard-headed man of business. Now this echoes a famous phrase by Stanley Baldwin, a prime minister between the wars, and he accused the rich of making a massive profit out of the First World War. That's why they were hard-headed, because they sacrificed human lives in order to make a massive profit. Now that is obviously Priestley's message in the play, but it's also quoted in Let Us Face the Future. So this is actually part of the Labour Party Manifesto, which talks about hard-headed men of business making profits out of the First World War. And the manifesto says, look, Don't vote Conservative, because those same men will make massive profits out of the Second World War, and we've got to prevent that. We've got to make sure that we have a new and fairer society. So when you know that, you can see how clearly the play is designed not just as a form of theatre, and not just as a way of putting forward socialist views. It's actually demanding action from the audience and saying, get out and vote, and for God's sake, vote socialist. So you can see that these features that I've just talked about will get you into level 6. They will make you convincing. They will give you a depth to your analysis. Let's zoom in on this paragraph here. They'll give you a well-structured argument, because you'll be able to say how he uses the audience's own experiences of reading and fiction to embed his message in this play. And finally, that gives you the opportunity to be conceptualized, because what you're saying is that this play doesn't exist just on its own as a moment in time on the stage. It also talks to other texts and puts itself in the tradition of other texts that the audience will already be familiar with. Pretty cool, eh? An easy way to get into the top band, where the top of grade 7, all of grade 8 and all of grade 9 live. So if you would like more tips on getting the top grades, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to give me your comments about whether you like having the extra text on the page or not, and see you soon on my channel.